Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to our bi-weekly Hangout on Air series. Today, we're going to talk about clicks versus sessions. So the discrepancies between what you see in AdWords reported as clicks and what you see in Google Analytics reported as sessions. I'm Krista Seiden, Analytics Advocate for Google Analytics, and I'm also the the Premium Training Manager. So I bring you this bi-weekly series. And today I'm joined by Matz and Gavin, who are product specialists. And actually, I'm here with Matz in the studio, but Gavin is in Sydney, Australia. So you'll be seeing him in the Hangout. This is what he looks like. So thank you so much, Gavin, joining us at, I think, 3:30 or 4 in the morning your time. All right, so let's kick this off. Just a reminder, please submit your questions. Use the Hangout on Air chat box in the Hangout window to go ahead and submit those questions that you want us to ask as they come up throughout the session. Or if you'd rather, you can use the form. There's a short link there on the screen for you guys. So definitely submit your questions throughout the session. We'll try to answer all of them as they come in. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to talk about clicks versus sessions and understanding the subtle differences. So we're going to cover several different things today. We're going to give you a background of kind of what this is. Then we're going to talk about more details of what a click is versus what a session is. We'll go through some common questions, such as why do I see more clicks than sessions or vice versa. And then we'll talk about some special ad format differences and how that might impact clicks versus sessions. And then finally, we'll talk about some common issues before we end with best practices and your questions. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So I'm going to start this off with a quote that I really love by Justin Cotoni, our analytics evangelist. He says, "Analytics and AdWords are made to be used together. While AdWords helps advertisers measure ads and their performance, analytics helps you understand what happens to your traffic once it gets to your site." So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Matz, and he'll take us from there.
Thank you, Krista, and hello, everyone. This is Matz, and I'm joined with Gavin, who's part of my team, and we work extensively on essentially improving our performances for our customers around AdWords and GA usage. And as you know, rightfully mentioned, AdWords and GA, they work best when they work together. That's the whole hope and the objective of these applications. They're good by themselves. And when you actually integrate AdWords and GA on the back end, there are 4 additional pieces of information that becomes visible. You are able to take AdWords data into GA, report that back. You can take GA data, which is a whole list of post-click interactions and engagements and conversion tracking, and pull that back into AdWords. You can also pull in a remarketing list. That's very important. You do want to remarket your customers, but you can get that data out of GA back into AdWords. And more importantly, you can get site stats, which is also a very powerful group of metrics. And when you start integrating, you start getting into discrepancies of sorts. So having said that, I'll try to give you guys a little bit of background.
Cool. So yeah, let's dig into the background. So what's a click?
Okay, so a very good question. A very simple answer, I guess. The most simple way to look at click is a hit to a Google server. Every time someone clicks on an ad, or someone, it's, in some cases, just views an ad, we track a click or an engagement or an impression. So it's one of the most simple metrics any ad platform or any application, web application out there tracks. And it's categorized in a very, very quick time frame as well.
Awesome. And how about a session?
Okay, so when you go from clicks to session, and that's when we start getting into a lot of complications. A session is itself a very complicated and a highly qualified metric. It's defined as it's the best proxy to a visit that we can get, or a visitor we can get, and every system defines it differently. If you look at the picture here, you can see a click is just one metric within the way a session gets identified. So high level, someone clicks on your ad, your browser points to a web server, the web server then understands what you're looking for, renders a page, renders all the component. One of those component is the GA script. The GA script itself is controlled by the settings of your browser and your network settings. And if that, again, allows you, and a good chunk of people also are last in tracking when their settings are turned off. A response goes back to a GA server, and that's when we record a session. So high level, it's a much more complicated, more qualified metric compared to a click.
So basically, a click is recorded when somebody actually clicks on the ad. AdWords knows that's a click. But then in between when that click happens and when GA records a session, there are a lot of different steps, and there are a lot of things that could potentially happen in any one of those steps that may cause some discrepancies between our clicks and session numbers.
Yeah, that is correct. And we see this with our clients all day long. I think this problem is since the evolution of time. People start comparing clicks and sessions. And if you look at this diagram, it's very clear they're very different metrics.
Cool. So maybe a little bit more about what a session is then.
Okay. So again, the session, as I mentioned, it's a more qualified, more detailed metric. But in GA, it's defined as a combination of events, views, transactions, conversion metrics, etc. These events itself define, duplication of session itself. So certain events can duplicate a metric, duplicate a session, I'm sorry, or may not. And that's the subtle differences that our customers should understand. We highly encourage our clients to go through our support section on our site and go through all the subtle differences. It's beyond the concept of this one hangout to go through all, but definitely there are a lot of levers which can change how a session gets identified. And
then how about a session? When does a session end? I think there are a couple ways, right?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of ways in which sessions end, but high level, you can categorize them into two major groups. The first group is time-based expiration. What I mean by that is, just to give you an example, Gavin, who's with us from Sydney, he takes 30 minutes plus lunches. Sorry for putting it out there in the Hangout, but when he's shopping, he goes to the site, he comes through a session, he creates a session of himself on the site, he goes through pages, picks a product, goes out for lunch, comes back after 30 minutes. He's still on the site, he still has the browser loaded, but then he converts. When he comes back to the site, he's another session. For GA, he's a session driven by the same traffic if he came through a paid search click or a display click. But now he's two sessions and the last session converted. So if you look at any report, it's one session, it's two sessions, but one click that drove the traffic.
Right. So how about a second way?
The second way is based on campaigns. As I mentioned, there are a lot of metrics, a lot of events which can change the way a session gets identified. And one of them is the campaign attribution itself. One thing to keep in mind is direct campaign never overwrites a tracked campaign. So if I come in to the site as a paid search visit and I return the site as a direct visit, I would never overwrite. I would be second visit attributed to the first campaign. The second point is very important. Highly encourage all clients should auto tag, use auto tagging for AdWords. But when you implement that, every click itself gets a unique G-click ID, and that ID creates a new session value for us. So every click through is a new session for us, even though it's from the same type of media.
Got it. Cool. That's really good to know. So maybe now let's talk about some more common questions that we hear. So I know a lot of people ask why they see more sessions than clicks. So can you help us understand why that might be?
So that's a very good question. And I think if you look at the kind of questions we get, that is a big chunk of what we do all day, answering that question for our customers. And first thing I want to advise to customers is don't be alarmed when you see this. In most cases than not, it's not an issue for your site. And it's a positive sign. It really denotes that you're getting more people coming back to your site with the same channel of traffic that you initially engaged them with. If you look at this picture, it kind of depicts it very clearly. My campaign drove a ton of traffic to your site. Those visits spent 30 minutes, spent some time on your site. They left your site. They returned as direct campaign multiple times and then potentially converted. Now, all these three sessions are identified and grouped under the same campaign. So it really, the campaign drove one click, but it drove two additional return visits. That's like the
because we're
main reason.
not overriding with the campaign parameters with direct. So each of those returning sessions just shows up again as the first campaign that they click through.
Yeah, Exactly. So that's the main reason. Again, the other reason could be you're comparing different reports set up at different attribution models on the back end. So when you compare a report from core GA, understand it has all traffic reported into it versus an AdWords report or MCF reports. So those are subtle differences you want to keep in mind when you start looking at these reports.
Right. Cool. So what about when people pause a campaign, but they're still seeing activity from that campaign in Google Analytics?
Yeah, so that happens a lot too. And trust me, your campaigns are paused. We're not running them on the back end and sending you traffic or charging you in the back end. So don't be alarmed again. One click can result in multiple repeat visits, and a campaign typically ends at the end of 6 months. So that's a standard campaign timeout window. That is also modifiable based on your business model. But if a person returns back after the first click, we still increment sessions for the same campaign, even though there's no click. So
so similar to like what we just talked about, we're not overriding those campaign parameters if they're coming back directly.
Exactly.
And so it's still going to look like people are coming from this paid campaign, even though you're not actually still paying for it.
Exactly.
So don't worry, you're not still paying for this data.
No one's making you pay more. It's free visits.
Right. So what about when people are seeing different landing pages that they didn't specify coming in and being attributed to those campaign parameters?
Okay, so that's like the second line of defense when people start auditing their reports and trying to understand how their campaigns are doing. Very important fact to keep in mind is there are two types of URL or destination URL reports. The first one is actually called the destination URL report in AdWords, and it's the URL you define when you define your campaign in AdWords. The second one is the landing page URL reports, and those are within GA, and those define the page the visitor landed on. When you put these two together and look at repeat visits, a person might be landed on a specific campaign multiple times, but his destination URL is the one that was initially defined. So for a campaign, it can have multiple landing pages based on return visits, but it's the one landing page that you define that drives the first visit. So again, not to be alarmed. Things to look out for is redirects. We see that a lot, and we'll get more detailed into how we can identify and triage them. But those are common factors why you see URLs that you didn't originally define.
Got it. So I'm seeing a common theme between the last couple that we were talking about, in that if people are coming back direct, we're not overriding their campaign parameters. And so a lot of things may happen in that case. You may get more sessions. You may see visits from campaigns that have been paused, or you may see people coming and landing on different pages that weren't actually associated with your ad as a destination URL, but because they still have those parameters from the campaign that were not overwritten, it's going to look like that.
It's going to look like that. And then there's a lot that happens within the site as well. So just to keep in mind.
Cool. So what about not set? Those two words, I think, cause a lot of alarm for people. So can you help debunk this one for us?
Sure. So when you see not set, again, it's a reason to be alarmed, and there are certain types you should not be alarmed. If you see a small chunk of not set values, do not be alarmed. It's probably test values. Your tech teams are testing on the background. You might see a few numbers here and there. So don't be alarmed. If you see a big chunk of your traffic falling into not set, things to look out for is your accounts not being integrated correctly. A lot of our clients are under the impression that the accounts have been, accounts when I say means AdWords and GA accounts are linked correctly between each other. But that's not the case always. There are times when on the surface, the accounts are linked, but the right views are not corrected, or the tracking has not been implemented. Or more importantly, the tracking was implemented correctly, but the parameters are modified, the parameters we use for understanding a campaign. Sometimes servers change the case on these parameters, and a lowercase becomes uppercase, and we lose tracking from that point onwards, or a redirects miss these trackings. So in these cases, when clients start looking into their report, from our perspective, we see source and medium as Google and CPC that you've defined. But what we don't see is anything more detailed like campaign or keyword attribution, and we have to report back and not set. That's an indication for you to start looking at which campaigns were set up how, and go through some of our common tools to troubleshoot and understand if the parameters are being dropped or if their campaigns are not linked correctly between AdWords and GA.
Got it. Okay. All right. So now maybe let's talk about special ad formats. So maybe we'll jump over to Sydney for this one. and have Gavin join us and kind of help us understand what is going on with TrueView and YouTube ads. Why do we see differences in clicks versus sessions because of these?
Sure. Thanks, guys. Yeah, so if we think about, well, there's actually two formats that I want to specifically call out just because they're different to the way a normal ad format would work, and the way when we look at clicks and sessions, when we compare those two things, they're going to be different for these particular ad formats, and it's just to do with the way users engage with those particular ad formats. So we're all familiar with like a search ad, where you bid on certain keywords that you think are relevant to the product or service you're offering, and we show an ad for that particular keyword or service, and a user clicks on that ad after searching for that particular service or product. TrueView ad is a little bit different because users are often on YouTube and they're not necessarily actively seeking out your service or product. So it's a bit more of an interruption-based ad format. And so the idea is that the way that we look at the way we charge users or we charge you to run these ads is a little bit different. So for example, we don't bill necessarily on the click on the ad, but we bill based on how how users interact with the ad. So if they view the ad, that's usually when we actually bill you. So the click is sort of a secondary action that they could take, and depending on your ad itself and whether or not it has a call to action, they may or may not actually click on that. So so a common thing that sort of comes up is the users see that they may have like a bunch of views for a particular video, and they have a very low number of sessions. And so just because you've generated a lot of views for a particular ad doesn't mean that we're going to have a lot of sessions afterwards. So a better metric to compare with is a website click, which we provide as part of the TrueView reporting. And this website click is actually free. So you're not, unlike a search ad where you pay for the click, with a TrueView ad, you're not actually paying for that click. And as a result of that also, what we tend to find is the discrepancies tend to be higher, and it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem. It just means that the level of engagement with that ad is different to, say, a search ad. And so the second ad format where we tend to see a lot of differences because the model is a bit different is Gmail sponsored promotions. And so this ad unit, if you're logged into your Gmail account, checking your emails, you might see in the top right-hand side, for example, a little promotional tile. And if you click to expand that tile, that's actually the point in which you as the advertiser is billed for that. And so that doesn't necessarily, what that actually does is it expands the ad format. So in the picture shown here in this presentation, you can see that clicking on that ad expands the window and we can see the full offer. And then there's actually another call to action within that expansion that users can click on. So the first click won't necessarily lead to a corresponding session, but the second one might. And so we also report this metric separately. So if you're going to be comparing clicks and sessions, just make sure that you compare the relevant call to action clicks as opposed to the actual click on the tile ad itself.
Got it. So it's expected that you would see a difference here, especially with the Gmail sponsored promotion, it sounds like, where people are clicking to view that ad within Gmail. And so their users are being charged at that point and showing a click at that point. But people won't necessarily click through all the time to the website. And so there could be actually a pretty big discrepancy in clicks versus sessions in this case, right?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. So, and as you know, with AdWords, there's like a whole bunch of different ad formats. So this is just two examples. So if you're running some of those more obscure ad formats, it's worth looking into and just comparing the models and the way we measure clicks and the way we charge you for that ad. The next thing I think would be good to talk about, we sort of mentioned a lot of the common reasons for differences, but there's also like common issues that we do tend to come across. And so how do we know when we have a problem as opposed to, say, have normal activity? So what I usually start with is graphing out so Google Analytics gives you in in the AdWords campaign reporting section, it gives you a really good tools for comparing these two metrics on a graph. And so what I tend to look for when I compare clicks and sessions on a graph is like any sudden drops. So if you see a sudden drop in sessions, but your clicks remain constant, that could indicate some kind of like tracking issue or some kind of problem with the way Google Analytics is recording activity. If you see like a metric suddenly break away from the trend in a similar sort of sense, so you may see a really large increase in clicks because you've upped your AdWords spend, but you might only see a constant number of sessions as if nothing had changed in terms of your AdWords spend. So that would obviously be another red flag I'd look for. Sometimes the issue isn't necessarily that obvious. You just have a really large discrepancy. So for example, you may see like 1,000 clicks and you're only seeing 100 sessions. So that would be a reason to investigate further. Also, and then there's probably the most obvious one where you have like a whole bunch of clicks accrue, but you're actually not showing any sessions at all. So that is often a case of that there's something critically wrong there. So once you've had a look at that and maybe drilled down to a campaign or ad group level, maybe you've isolated that change to a particular campaign or ad group, the next thing to do is to try and figure out why that's happening. So to sort of start with the most obvious, but this is often something that gets missed because you have so many pages on your website, is to check your tracking code configuration on your landing pages. So this, unfortunately, can be a real manual process of sort of visiting the different URLs and just double checking that the code is working. And one really good tool to have that can save you a lot of time and can give you sort of instant notification if there's a problem is Google Tag Assistant. So this is a plugin for the Chrome web browser. And when you navigate to a particular page, what it does is it will notify you of the tags that we've detected, and it will give you like a color-coded system that allows you to sort of very quickly at a glance determine if there's anything maybe funny going on or if everything looks good. So as you can imagine, it's almost like a traffic light system with a few more colors in there. Green generally just means everything's working fine. There's nothing to worry about. But any other colors, indicate maybe a more severe or maybe a minor problem.
Yeah, definitely.
So this is a really,
I think the Tag Assistant's a really important Chrome extension to have. So if you guys, our users, you don't have this yet, I think per Gavin's insights here, you should definitely get this Chrome extension. It can really help you look at your tracking code and figure out if there's an issue.
Cool. So the other, yeah, sorry, go on.
Sorry, Gavin. It's a little far across the oceans to be communicating here. So I think tracking code is a really important one to look at. But I also know, and I think particularly back in my practitioner days, I came across a lot of issues with redirects. So redirects seem to be one thing that was a common issue around stripping URL parameters and stripping those campaign tagging parameters. So can you give us a little more information about this one?
Yeah, definitely. I would say probably a large percentage of the issues that we see with clicks and sessions, and there being large discrepancies, is definitely due to redirects. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why people use these. They're perfectly valid things to use. Sometimes your content moves. Sometimes you want to deliver a more ideal experience depending on the device a user is on. So for example, a mobile device, you may want to send them to the mobile-friendly version of your site. You may have had content move around, and so you may be trying to direct people to the right place. The other case that we tend to see quite often is that sometimes you want to track activity for AdWords in a third-party system. So you have sort of an intermediary service where you send the user first and then forward them onto your website so that you can track that activity in that other bit of software. And so there's nothing particularly wrong with any of those things. In some cases, they enhance the user experience. The trouble is that what AdWords does is it tends to look at the destination URL you specified in AdWords, and we append the the auto tagging parameter, the GCLID parameter, to the end of that URL. So what happens is if the URL you specify in AdWords has a redirect that forwards a user to another page for whatever reason, sometimes that parameter gets lost or it gets modified along the way. And when that happens, that causes all sorts of issues for Google Analytics in terms of the way we attribute the session back to a particular campaign. So unfortunately, at the moment, there's not really a great way to automate a lot of these checks. But we do have inbuilt tools that you can use to help diagnose these problems. So one of them is Chrome Developer Tools. And this is actually part of the Chrome browser itself. So you don't actually have to install any other like third-party plugins or anything like that. This comes shipped with the rest of the browser. And the way you access it would be a little bit different between the different operating systems you're on. And so probably the most important thing, though, to be aware of is what the information you're looking for, because you don't necessarily have to use Chrome Developer Tools for this. You can use a variety of tools that allow you to sort of check for redirects. But the particular example I wanted to give you is looking at the Network tab within Chrome Developer Tools. And so what this allows you to see is a particular request for a page and then what the response of the server is. So in the example that we've got here, let's assume that our AdWords destination URL is example.com. And to test this, so let's say we wanted to test and make sure auto tagging is working correctly. We would put example.com into our browser address bar. Before we load the page, though, we would open Chrome Developer Tools, go to the Network tab, and then we would go to back to our URL again, and we would add a little bit more information to that URL. So we'd add a fake or a test auto tagging parameter. So we'd add the question mark, which signifies that we're adding a query parameter to our URL, and GCL ID or the Google Click ID equals. And then the value I like to use is a mixture of upper and lowercase alphanumeric characters. And I like to include a hyphen in there as well. And the reason for that is to try and emulate the real world value as much as possible, because sometimes servers have different ways of handling these different characters. And so it's good to have a test value like that sort of represents the real world, just because sometimes there can be some really tricky scenarios in there. And so what we're looking for when we look to see that original request, we're looking to see if there's any sort of status code that comes back to us. So the most common ones for redirects are 301 redirects or 302 redirects. And so what the server will then respond is, I see your request for this particular URL that contains the auto tagging parameter. And here is the location I want to send you to now. So the location information is under the response headers. And in this particular example, we can see that the parameters are missing after the redirect. And that's a big problem for Google Analytics, because then we can't actually see where that user originally came from without it. So that immediately would be something you'd want to look into with your website developers.
That's really handy. That's a good tool to be able to check this out, to see the URL that you're sending, if it's actually going to the place that you want and maintaining those parameters. So thanks for sharing that with us. So maybe let's bring it back here to Mountain View and talk a little bit about latency. I know that this can be a big problem with clicks versus session discrepancies. So Matz, do you have some thoughts on latency?
Sure, yeah. And I guess just coming from my background, I've worked extensively on site forensics, and we can have a full day session on how customers and clients and website owners can essentially tackle the problem of latency for their site. I know a lot of players out there are struggling with it, and it's a problem that's grown with the development of World Wide Web. Three things to kind of keep in mind when you are tackling with latency. And as when we explained initially, the idea of tracking a session is a little bit more complex than just tracking a click. Latency can be introduced at any point in time within that entire transaction. And because of that, we might lose sessions, and platforms in general would lose sessions. So there are three major challenges that a customer should think about. Page layouts, they can get extremely heavy over time by adding more component, more Flash events, images, CSS files, calling objects, etc. Try to keep that under check, try to keep that under limit. Have a web hosting platforms, definitely try to keep check on how good your platform service provider is. how good these web servers are, how available they are. There are tons of services out there to allow you to measure the performance of your web server and making sure it's available, most of the time when customers are asking for or requesting pages and objects on your site. And finally, network latency. And more importantly, mobile network latency. Any stats you read out there will tell you that a lot of your customers are accessing your site via mobile networks and on mobile devices. And the bandwidth there is way smaller than a regular desktop bandwidth. So keep that in mind. Create mobile-friendly pages, mobile-friendly content, things that load fast and render quickly on your mobile devices, because that can really result in latency being a major driver for discrepancies. And frankly speaking, performance of your site. You're losing e-commerce dollars on the table when your site is not fast enough. We've given some best practices here. Compression, using image sprites, where essentially load one large image and then break it into smaller pieces to render on every page component or every page. Caching refreshes using CDNs, and probably working more closely with your web hosting service provider, and in more cases than not, upgrading to a more professional service when needed. And finally, we have a set of reports that can help you: site speeds reporting and page speed analysis reporting, which we really encourage our clients to look at and understand if they have any issues on their site and try and diagnose that better.
Those are some great best practices. I know there's also a best practice white paper that you guys recently put out. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, and we did put this out very recently. It's been very widely reviewed and welcomed by the community in general. There's a Go link that you guys can go to. There's a lot of things we talk about in the best practices white paper, and just to kind of the way we start, AdWords and GA, they work best. It's like sunshine and beach, or dogs and tennis balls. They're best when they're by themselves, but they're even better when they're working together. And things you should kind of keep in mind is always try to auto tag your ads. That's the recommended practice. It enables us to do a lot of extra reporting that is really helpful for yourself when you're measuring business performance or diagnosing issues with your campaigns. Segment your behavior, look at different segments of your traffic, create a segment for a mobile device and see how that performs versus your desktop to really understand if mobile is an issue for you. Layer secondary dimensions, which are either GA dimensions or AdWords dimensions on your reports, to understand if there are micro segments that are not working for you or working very well for you, so you can optimize better. Look out for redirects, intermediary URLs. Don't try to create them between an AdWords click and your landing page, because that can mess up a lot of our reporting. And finally, we have a set of benchmarking reports which are helpful for you to understand if your site is doing anything drastically different than the average out there in your space. So look at those, enable those on your reports, and take advantage of those reporting.
That's awesome. So we have a lot of helpful resources and links from everything that we talked about today. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this slide up here for a minute or two while we start to take questions. So just a reminder, if you have questions about the differences between AdWords and Google Analytics clicks and sessions, please put them in the chat window or through the forum. And I guess with that, I'll dive right into the first question. So Gavin, I'm going to ask this one to you. When will the AdWords integration with GA be on the campaign level as opposed to the account level? This comes from James. He says, often we have clients who have an AdWords account hit multiple sites and therefore multiple GA properties. And since the integration is at the account level, it causes overinflation of clicks and cost and impression metrics in GA. So do you have any insights on how we can best look at this situation?
Yeah, sure. So I can't say that we're going to be changing this anytime soon, unfortunately. I can see how it would be really useful. But in the interim, until we come up with a solution for that kind of scenario that you described, as a best practice, what I tend to recommend is that for each separate domain or a website that you may be advertising, it's probably best to have a separate AdWords account. And so that way you don't have to worry about splitting out campaigns and all that sort of stuff. If that becomes a bit of a problem to manage all those accounts, what we do offer is a My Client Center type account for AdWords, which allows you to have a single login to control multiple, like what we call child accounts. And that can be a good way of, managing all those different accounts for those different websites. And the other thing is also, we recently made it a lot easier in terms of the way you link multiple AdWords accounts to multiple GA accounts, particularly for MCC users. So that's probably the best solution at this point in time, just in terms of keeping everything structured and nice and orderly.
Great, thanks. So I have another question from Doolan. And Gavin, I'm going to give this one to you too. If we integrate AdWords with Google Analytics, what metrics from AdWords can we see in the GA user interface? And which metrics from AdWords can you not see in the GA interface after those accounts are linked?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Let's start with what you can see in Google Analytics from AdWords. So generally what we do import is the most sort of basic metrics from AdWords. So things like clicks, cost per click, impressions, revenue per click. Some of the stuff we don't bring in with it is like the quality score metric doesn't come across. And some of the maybe conversion data as well, because that's centered around AdWords reporting, and GA has its own conversion reporting. If we look in the other direction, from GA, you can actually bring in quite a few metrics into AdWords to help make your analysis in AdWords a little easier. So for example, you can bring in basic site metrics, so things like bounce rate, page views, time on site, those sort of basic metrics which would help when you're looking at your particular keyword performance, for example. And there are a couple of other things that you can do, which is also really useful if you're using auto tagging, which is another reason why we really recommend it, is that you can import Google Analytics based conversions, so your goal based conversions and your transactions, and you can bring them into AdWords. So that can be really, really powerful as well.
Awesome. So we have another question from Doolan, and Matz, I'm going to give this one to you. And we want to know what web analytics platforms allow you to filter out visits by bots. Web analytics platforms allow you to filter out visits by bots. Does the same apply to AdWords or double-click reporting?
Sure. So this is also a very common question, and it's highly advised you folks go through the support documentation on it, because we've made this public in many cases. GA by default filters out bots traffic and robot traffic. We update that list very often, and we want to make sure that we track the right visitors to your site. The same happens on the AdWords side, but on the AdWords and double-click side, we even look for invalid clicks, and there's a support article on that topic as well. What we really try to do for our clients is to look for click patterns which appear to be non-browser traffic or manually created traffic from individuals that are not really customers or actual individuals who are interested in your content, as well as bots. So we do filter that out. We don't report that in AdWords or DoubleClick the way we do for GA, but you can actually report some of these segments out. There's also a concept of proactively we refund our clients, so we don't want to charge them for traffic that they weren't wasn't real and driving to their site. So we do often, when we find out that a certain amount of traffic driven to your site was not real, we do issue refunds at time. So yeah, we do. I mean, it's a little different process when you compare AdWords versus GA, but on both platforms, we definitely filter out bots. That's
great to hear. So just a reminder, please go ahead and submit any questions that you have into the Hangout on Air window. All right, so we have a question here from Alex. And Alex says, we're a bit confused about this scenario. A person clicks on an AdWords ad, they visit the website, they click back, search on Google again, and then click another AdWords ad. So Matz, is this considered 2 clicks in one session or 2 different sessions? And this is assuming that auto tagging is turned on.
Exactly, and this is a classic case. We see a lot of this happening, a lot of repeat visitors, and people search for a specific keyword, then they search again with a discount in it or a 10% off, and that can result in a lot of additional traffic. We do track both the clicks. As I mentioned, auto tracking enables a lot of additional reporting for us, and every click through an auto tracked click through is a new campaign, is a new session in our databases. So we do report that back as 2 clicks and 2 sessions. It's not duplication of any.
Yeah, that goes back to what you were saying earlier with there's a unique Gclid attached to every ad click. Right.
Yeah.
So Alex actually had a follow-up question as well. And he said, to clarify, we're really more curious about whether the person clicks back to the Google SERP and clicks the same ad. Is that 2 clicks in 2 sessions or 2 clicks in 1 session? So I'm guessing this is probably the same thing. It's a new unique Gclid.
It is a new Gclid, and it will basically create a new session in our system. The only thing that folks should keep in mind is, and this is a big driver of traffic in many cases because people bookmark sites a lot. I know I do. I bookmark almost everything that feels like it's important, and I'll forget how to get there. When you come directly to your site, when you come through bookmarks, we don't consider that to be a channel-driven traffic. And if that increments a session, the session goes back to the campaign that drove the first click. And that's considerably like a standard practice across the industry because you don't really know how people are getting there. So you attribute the return visit to the last traffic channel that drove the traffic. So that's the only caveat to keep in mind. But it's not a small chunk of visitors if you look at any GA account or any of your websites out there.
Cool. So Matz, I have another question for you. Can you elaborate on campaign timeout a little bit? Can it be modified? How can it be modified? What information should people know about campaign timeout?
Sure, and so this is also it's a deeper concept. Some clients who are a little bit sophisticated are actually going out and modifying their window, and you can do that within AdWords to attribute your conversion back into the initial click. By default, it's 6 months. So when a person clicks through your site, clicks through a paid search link on your site, does a bunch of transactions, come back later as a return visit, without any campaign attribution, all the activities that we see post that click gets pushed back into the first campaign that was driving that traffic. And that window is 6 months by default. You can modify it for your campaigns based on if you're running a branding campaign versus a conversion or a more conversion-driven campaigns. But yeah, that's a concept that you should definitely play around with depending on your business model, and that does have an impact to how your sessions get identified for channels.
Cool. So Gavin, I have another question for you, and that's how can I measure ad performance per positions?
So per position. So I believe that we still have a report in the AdWords campaign reporting section that will give you detail on this. The only catch is that in order to be able to leverage this report is that you have to have auto tagging on. So we sound a bit like a broken record, but auto tagging is really the feature that allows us to expand on the information around that click. And part of that expansion is including details around the particular position of the ad when we're looking at Google search, for example.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So I think that's all the questions we have. But I'd really like to get maybe just one last tip or thought from both of you. So Gavin, we'll start with you. What's the one thing that you really think that people should take away today that they really need to know about demystifying clicks versus sessions and those discrepancies?
Yeah, that's actually a good opportunity here to sort of, some people may have noticed that throughout the presentation today or throughout the talk here, that we haven't really given any kind of guidelines as to what to expect in terms of a discrepancy. And I think it's really important that people understand that there's no like line in the sand that they need to shoot for. There's no sort of like benchmark that they have to conform to. There are so many factors that play into things, like, for example, the different ad formats that you're running, your target audience, the latency of your website, the user activity around whatever it is that you're selling or the service you're offering. So there's so many factors that can be taken into consideration. So for one side, it might be totally normal to see like a 20% discrepancy, but for another site, and depending on the ads they're running, it might be even 30%. So yeah, I think that's the key thing that I want people to take away, is to start thinking about the fact that there's not like a certain level that they have to hit. I think that's probably, yeah, really important.
Got it. So what I'm hearing is that there's no expected level. Your difference is maybe 10%, they may be 90%, and that could be good or bad. And there's no real industry standard. It's kind of very, very dependent on the types of ads that you're running and the type of site that you have.
Definitely.
Great. So I actually have one more question that just came in before we get to your final thoughts, Matz. And that's, can or when will we be able to fetch Gclid behind the scenes data in real time, or GCID behind the scene data in real time? For example, to be able to get the campaign keyword value, and that's from your array.
Okay. Yeah, I think I kind of understand the problem or the question in a certain fashion. And Gavin, feel free to jump in. But we currently do that, right? So the way we actually understand a click-through is based on the Gclick ID. That's assigned to every click. And that's tied down at a keyword and a campaign level. So with that, we can attribute back a specific click back to a campaign and a keyword that was initially advertised on. So that's anyways happening on the back end. We don't report out these IDs for our, I guess, security reasons and other privacy concerns. But we are doing this on the back end, and all the reporting that's enabled on top of it is what's really important for customers to look at. So we, all the reporting for AdWords that's built on top, and all the integrated reports between G and AdWords that are built on top of this ID. So it's definitely being utilized to give you guys the value that you need to drive your campaigns better.
Got it. Thanks. So I guess with that, we'll go ahead and get your final thoughts. What's the one thing that you want people to really take away from the session?
Sure. Yeah. So a few things. I think the point Gavin had was really valid. There are benchmarks out there, and people might give you benchmarks, but high level benchmarks are based on your business performance. So your site might be performing way better than others or way lower than other. And the idea is you improve your own performance with every iteration of better web servers or better latency measures, or improving your cleaning up your redirects that can cause traffic to be missed. So definitely benchmarks are internal, better than being external in nature and trying to match against them. Some level of difference is fine. It's acceptable. It's healthy to have. So be very calm about seeing that. Something like we kind of didn't touch upon that topic, but at midnight we basically end our sessions, and depending on your view settings, we essentially would refresh the cache for any session. So you would see things like this working in the background, but try to look at aggregated numbers rather than actual numbers and trying to draw conclusions. And definitely, try to invest more time with your webmasters and your web tech team to understand why you see these issues. They'll definitely have more reports to look at. We enable a lot of webmaster tools, and at Google, we definitely put these tools out there for you to use. But it's more important for you to connect with your tech resources, your web developers, and take their help in understanding some of these issues, because in more cases than not, they're very site-specific. It is not platform-specific for any platform out there. And you're in the best position to fix and troubleshoot them. And the best is when you see this issue, you start investigating it. Don't wait for a month or weeks before you report this out, because by that time it's tough to even replicate some of these issues. So try to be a little bit proactive and work very closely with your web tech teams to diagnose this and improve your performance.
Great. I think that these were really, really helpful, useful tips that we got from Gavin and Matz today. So again, I want to say thank you so much. Thank you, Gavin and Matz, for being here with us today. So let me leave you with a few things related to this biweekly series before we go. So I'm putting a slide up on the screen for additional resources. We're going to leave this up for a couple minutes after. So if you don't see it now, don't worry, it'll be there. But as always, the Help Center for Google Analytics is a great place for support. The Analytics Academy to take digital analytics fundamentals and platform principles. There's e-commerce and mobile courses. That's a great resource for really getting up and going with analytics. And then finally, I know I've been saying this for a couple weeks, but I'm really, really excited to say that we are in the process of launching our new Google Plus community for the GA Premium group of users. And we are adding people as we speak. It's a little bit of a process to kind of add all of our users. So you should see an invite for this soon. We're going to send out a communication maybe next week about this. But this is going to be a place where you can go, you can talk with each other. We're going to move hosting these Hangouts on Air to the new community. And it'll be a great resource for you guys. We'll put in a lot of tips and new feature announcements and all those kind of things. So definitely look out for that. Also coming up for our next Hangout on Air series, we have live from London. I'm going to be in London the week after next, and we're going to do a GA Partner Summit recap. So if you're not able to attend our Partner Summit next week, don't worry. I'm going to give you a rundown of all the important things that happened at the summit the week after, as well as I'm going to be live with Daniel Weisberg, who is also an analytics advocate here at Google, and an author. And he just published a book called GA Integrations. So we're going to talk a little bit about his book as well. So that should be a really great session. Definitely tune in and get all of the details about the Partner Summit. Additionally, towards the end of the month, we're hosting an enhanced e-commerce session. And then as we look into July, be on the lookout for our DevRel team coming in and talking about the demos and tool site and the features and products that they're releasing to help make scalable analytics more accessible to you guys. And then I think we'll probably have another Ask the Expert session later in the month as well. So definitely have your office hours type questions ready to go. So very, very excited about all of these things that are coming up. Stay tuned, look for those communications, and when you get your invite, join the G+ community for Google Analytics Premium. So thank you guys so very much, and have a nice day.
Yep. Thank you, Krista.